Hi everyone, I'm here today to talk about growing into platform engineering. But before I do, let's do some intros. So who am I? I'm Lawrence and I'm currently working as a product engineer at Incident.io. So we provide incident response software to companies to help them scale their response process. So kind of working with their existing tools like PagerDuty and all of that lot to make sure that the incident response goes as smooth as it possibly can. So I say this because at Incident we are growing and we're doing so quite fast. So when I first joined the company back in August, it was just me and the three founders. Since then we've gone and hired about 35 people. So we have about a team of 10 engineers and that's obviously causing us to think quite carefully about how we're going to grow over the next year. And especially for me, one question that's in my mind is, what is our plan for infrastructure engineering at Incident? So specifically, do we hire a platform team? And if we do, when? What might their remit be? Are we going to offer an infrastructure platform and developers bring us their containers and that's what we run? Or do we work more closely with kind of the application developers and make sure that we're deploying tools that they could use to improve the way that they develop their code? And what do we need to make that successful, both like culturally and technologically? So I think there's one answer to this that I reckon is probably the wrong one, which is that we could hire a really big platform team, right? And we could have them work full time on building out an internal developer platform with all the bells and whistles. But I think that would just be very premature for our stage of company, right? We'd end up with more people working on the platform team than we have working on the product. And I don't think that that's particularly appropriate, especially when we're kind of a scrappy startup at the moment. So what this talk is going to focus on is kind of the stuff that you can do that are pragmatic steps between a startup with nothing and kind of like a well-funded platform engineering organization. I'm going to talk about these in terms of anecdotes from my experience in a previous team and kind of contextualize that with the scale of the organization at the time so that anyone in a similar situation can kind of take those learnings and use them if they choose. So cool, let's dive in. Chapter 1. Platform software is just software. You're not special. So this comes from Q1 2018. Platform is myself and 3 other engineers at this point, and the broader engineering organization is 35 plus people. So what's the problem? Well, we're migrating at this point all of our infrastructure from IBM SoftLayer, where we were physically renting machines, to Google. I think you can kind of understand the difficulties we were having adopting modern DevOps practices when replacing a hard drive involves someone maybe today, maybe tomorrow, scooting down the data center to deliver you your new package. So yeah, at this point, we'd kind of invested enough in GCP that we had a working infrastructure over there, a GKE cluster. Our Helm charts were there and we could deploy to it. But the problem that we had now was we want to do this migration without downtime, right? So we're going to be, for at least a period of time, deploying software to the old place, so SoftLayer, and then to the new infrastructure too. So that's not too bad, right? Like we've got this script that can do the deployment and it can take one of our existing services and go deploy it into Google. So that's cool, right? But the problem is distribution of this script is hard. And actually even where we write this script and where we store it is something that at the time we hadn't had a proper answer to. So I think the realization that I'm going to encourage you all to adopt is that this is just another software problem. So I think in platform engineering, and also SRE in adjacent fields, we like to think that we're special. So I know that I recognize myself in some of these quotes, right? Like, this is too hard to test. Like, how would I get a Kubernetes cluster in like my test environment? That just sounds like really difficult, right? And actually, I think we are a bit special, right? Like a lot of the code that we write often does have a lot more moving parts than an application normally would. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't test it or we shouldn't apply software engineering best practices. In fact, it's just more reason that we should, I think, because this software that we're writing is usually so critical and kind of complicated when it goes wrong. So I reckon that the key to this is not to think it's too hard to do it. We need to make it easy for people in platform engineering teams to deploy like well-tested code and to make use of these best practices, right? So what did this mean for us in the company at the time? Well, first, like you do with any kind of broader software project where you know that you're going to be spending some time here and adding more things over time, you make it a home. So we went and found our infrastructure monorepo and we created a new Go project in it. And by home, what I mean is we didn't just drop a script in. What we actually did was created the skeleton of a broader CLI tool where the deployment script was just one of the commands on that CLI. And because we'd ended up planning for the future and creating a space for us to create more of these things in future, it meant that it was far more realistic for us to invest properly in a good CI pipeline and linting and good testing practices, because we knew that we were going to get kind of value from them over a longer period of time. And then kind of once you've got this stuff in place, you start saying, well, actually, like, can we continuously deploy this stuff? But like kind of CD, but for our stuff, that would be nice, right? So I think it's kind of ironic that we advocate for this so much with other teams, but often find that with stuff like this, where it's just like this command line tool, it's not necessarily as obvious on how we would deploy it. But I think it's still really important that we do. So what we did in this particular case was we have this Go binary, right? That's the command line tool, and we need to get it onto developers' laptops. So what we ended up doing was whenever you would merge the master, we would go deploy the asset into GitHub releases, and then we would have our scripts update a homebrew tap, which was what developers use to install this stuff onto their laptop. And then we could just go out and say, run brew upgrade and you'll be totally fine. So that was really good because at this point you've established that flywheel, right? You can ship things faster, which means that you can ship more things, and it actually just means that you're delivering more value to your customers. But at this point, when you kind of have these things, you start going, well, okay, like we've got a good place for this code, and we're deploying it to developer laptops. But that's not just where we have code, right? Like we've got this fleet of VMs and all sorts of other stuff that we run. So I'm going to suggest that actually now you consider deploying it everywhere. Like you've done the investment, now like make it pay. So what we did was we didn't just deploy to like developer laptops. We also deployed this to our Debian package registry, and then we had all of our VMs pull down the code. So at this point, it was the case that wherever you were, whether you were on a developer laptop or you were on a virtual machine that we were running, or even a container because it was in our base image, you would have access to this tool. And at this point, you've really kind of like solidified the value that you get from applying best practice software engineering to this problem. And your platform engineering team is hopefully feeling very happy about their fast cycle of change, deploy, and deliver. Cool. So, Chapter 2, you can't sell a product that no one wants. So this moves on in time quite a bit. So it's Q2 2021, and the platform team is almost 2 times as big now at 7 engineers. But engineering has like 5x or more. So you can imagine the problems that we have now are a bit different than we had before. So yeah, like what is the problem? So firstly, it's going to sound less like a problem and more like an achievement, right? Self-service has been achieved. So I think when I first joined the platform team, my manager at the time kind of got me to join by holding this dream in front of me, which was whenever a engineer would join the company, they would be able to follow a tutorial that would help them set up a toy service using all the production infrastructure that we would for our standard applications, right? And the key thing about that was that they would be able to do that with almost no assistance from the SRE team and certainly no approval step. So they could kind of play with it all by themselves. Now, I think at the time he'd kind of guessed at that being 6 to 12 months of work. Thanks, Roberto. 3.5 years after we started, we had now achieved this, which was great, right? But we had a bit of a problem with the tools that we were offering. And that was that, well, no one was really using it. That's a bit of a lie, right? Like adoption is never as black and white as that. So I think the real thing was that adoption was very inconsistent, and it varied across the teams. So especially those who had originally been working with us to build it, they were loving it. In fact, they kind of become power users in a way that kind of freaked me out. But I mean that's success in a different way, right? But like, why wasn't everyone using this? We knew it was a common problem shared across the org that people were blocked on our team. So like, what's the issue here? And when we went to go speak with the team, basically it came down to misalignment, right? So what we had interpreted when they said we're blocked on platform engineering time was that they would really appreciate us to give them some really good tools so that they could do it themselves. And actually what they had meant was, I want you to do this faster, which is kind of a funny misalignment there, and one that I think will be familiar to a few people in the room. But I want to step back a bit from this because, like, whilst we fix this in a few different ways, I think it's interesting to look at this as a more general problem that isn't specific to platform engineering, but it certainly is something that we fall prey to quite frequently. And I reckon there's two reasons for that. The first is that you are not your customer. So whilst we have, I think, a very healthy culture in platform engineering of dog fooding the things that we produce, we are actually a very different type of engineer than your average engineer across an engineering org. So what I mean by that is that platform engineering teams are often staffed with people who are tenacious and love new technology and really like being in the weeds when things go wrong. That's just not true or at least it's not entirely true for the whole of your engineering org. And that means that you can often look at the way that people, or you can often interpret the way that you feel about the tool as how your customer might feel, and that may not be the case. The other thing to note that kind of makes this a bit worse, I guess, is that those you work closely with are also not representative. So what I mean by this is the design partners that you chose, who are the early adopters of your tool, are themselves early adopters. They are the people really enthusiastic about kind of new technologies, and they're much closer to platform engineering mindset than anyone else in the org. So again, you've kind of like doubled down on this blind spot. But yeah, looking forward, I think it really helps to realize at this point that platform engineering is an intense, complex, and confounding product problem. So it's a product problem, and it pays to recognize that. If you treat it like a product problem, I would bet that it will become a lot easier. So I think a lot of the people who staff platform engineering teams come from parts of an organization that historically are seen as the furthest from product or the furthest from customers, certainly. And if you look at platform engineering as an evolution on like the service desk approach that we had before, then you're probably going to be holding it wrong, and it will hurt. So when I talk with PMs who are going to be a PM in a platform engineering team, which I think is a really good idea, by the way, I often describe it more as if you are a startup inside your organization, and you're going to have a really tough time trying to figure out who your customers are, what are the problems that you should be solving, but applying that kind of like lean startup mindset to the situation makes things a lot easier. Additionally, you also get the benefit that your customers are highly technical individuals who are also engineers often, and can give you really killer feedback. In fact, they're paid to do it, right? And you often have a high trust relationship with them already because they're your colleagues. So yeah, in a way, this is a product problem, but it comes with a load of advantages that should make it easier, but only if you really start treating it like one. So yeah, in rounding up, you're not special. In fact, you might be a bit in that you might be building software that's really quite complicated. And if so, you could probably get more value from employing best practices than most other software engineers can. And then second, platform engineering, it is product engineering, and don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. Cool. So if that sounds good, as in that work sounds exciting to you, then I want to call out that Incident.io, the company I'm working at, is about to go through this journey ourselves. And we're looking for our very first platform hire who can kind of help us steer that path and come out the other side. So if it does sound cool, drop me an email at that link. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening to my talk.